Old Forest rises east of Buckland's Hedge, a remnant of the primeval woods that once covered Eriador. When Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin push through the barrier and try to ride north along its edge, the trees close the path behind them and bend their course south toward the Withywindle Valley. The forest does not attack with a single voice. A pressure builds across the whole wood, narrowing lanes, shifting routes, and turning travelers away from any route that leads out. Each tree seems to remember trespass and respond with hostility that predates any individual will. Old Man Willow sits in the valley's center, and his trunk cracks open to swallow Merry and Pippin into a split along the bark. Frodo and Sam beat the trunk and flood the root with water from the river. The willow holds firm. Tom Bombadil arrives singing and commands the tree to release them, and the bark opens. Bombadil's authority over the forest has no explained mechanism in the text. He speaks to the willow as one speaks to a neighbor, and the willow obeys. The forest recognizes him, and he recognizes every tree by a name that the hobbits never hear. What the trees remember, and why the whole wood resists travelers, the book does not say. The pressure extends beyond the willow's reach, and the willow's attack is one expression of a hostility that belongs to the forest itself. Barrow-downs lie west of the old forest across the Brandywine, and fog rolls across the grass before the hobbits can keep the road. Standing stones mark the edges of Tir Ngortheb, the old burial mounds associated with ancestors of the Edain. Cardolan later used these same downs for its own dead, digging chambers into the hills where princes and warriors were laid with weapons forged in Westernesse. The great plague of the Third Age emptied Cardolan, and the Witch King of Angmar sent evil spirits to inhabit the empty barrows. These wights turned the downs into a trap that caught travellers in fog and drove them into cold chambers underground. Frodo wakes on a stone slab inside a barrow, lit by a pale green light. Merry and Pippin lie beside him, dressed in white and crowned with pale jewelry. A barrow-wight chants over them, and a cold hand reaches for Frodo's face. Frodo seizes a sword from the hoard and hacks off the wight's hand at the wrist. Tom Bombadil arrives and breaks the spell with song, dragging the hobbits into daylight. He takes the blades from the barrow and gives one to each hobbit. The swords were forged in Westernesse for wars against the Witch King of Angmar. Merry carries his blade south to the Pelennor fields, and when he stabs the Witch King in the knee, the enchantment woven into that steel breaks the wraith's unseen sinew. The text never confirms which prince or warrior was first laid in the tomb where Frodo found the blade. The association with Cardolan's royalty is proposed in the appendices, but the specific tomb and the specific spirit remain unnamed. Moria's depths open after the bridge of Khazad-dûm, when Gandalf falls with the Balrog into a chasm that the dwarves never mapped. The fall carries them far below the deepest delvings of Durin's folk, into tunnels carved by nameless things that gnaw at the roots of the world. Gandalf later tells Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli that he does not know what those things are. He refuses to describe them. Sauron does not know them either, and no record in Middle-earth names their origin or their maker. The Balrog knows the passages through the lowest dark, and it leads the chase through tunnels that predate any people who kept maps. They reach a cold underground lake, and the Balrog's fire goes out. It rises from the water covered in slime, its flame smothered, and Gandalf fights it in the dark at the lake's edge. The Balrog flees upward through passages that climb through the mountain's root. Gandalf follows. They reach the endless stair, a staircase cut from the lowest dungeon to the peak of Xirac-Sigil, which no living person in the Third Age had climbed in living memory. The stair rises through the heart of the mountain, and at its top they break out onto the peak beneath the sky. The Balrog ignites again in the open air, and the fight on the summit lasts until Gandalf throws the demon down from the height. Gandalf dies there and returns. What he saw in the deepest tunnels, and what lives there now, he never reports. The nameless things remain nameless, because the one person who saw them chose silence. The lowest chambers of Moria extend below any depth that the dwarves reached, and the text leaves what inhabits them without anatomy, allegiance, or origin. Dead Marshes spread northwest of Dagorlad, where the Battle of the Last Alliance was fought at the end of the Second Age. The graves of the fallen were dug into dry ground. Over centuries, the wetlands expanded and swallowed the burial sites. Later battles in the region added their own dead to the growing fen. By the time Frodo, Sam and Gollum cross the marshes in the Third Age, the graves lie beneath pools of dark water. Frodo sees pale faces in the water, ringed with weeds in their hair, looking upward through the surface. Corpse lights flicker above the pools like candles set on the water. Gollum warns the hobbits not to follow the lights. He says the dead cannot be touched. Frodo leans over one pool and stares at a face beneath the surface. The light draws him, and he slips toward the water. Sam pulls him back. Gollum hisses that the dead will pull them under if they reach for the lights. The book gives no mechanism for the faces or the lights. No spell is named, and no caster is identified. The marshes simply hold the dead of old battles, and the water shows them to anyone who looks down. Whether the faces are spirits, memories, or something else, the text does not say. Sam and Frodo see them and cannot explain them. Gollum knows the danger and offers no cause, only a warning. Paths of the Dead. Begin at Dunharrow, where a line of ancient stones runs from the upper camp toward the Dimholt Wood. Each stone is shaped like a man, and the line leads downhill into a gorge where the trees thicken and the light fails. At the gorge's end stands the Dark Door, a great stone gate set into the mountain. An old man sits beside it in the book, warning travellers to turn back. Aragorn passes through the gate with Legolas, Gimli, and the Grey Company. The route runs beneath the White Mountains, through the Dimholt and past a stone door where Baldur, son of Brago, once entered and died. Baldur's skeleton lies against the shut inner door, his legs broken beneath him, his sword cracked across his knees. The men of the mountains swore an oath to Isildur at the Stone of Eric, promising to fight against Sauron. They broke that oath, and Isildur cursed them to remain unresting until they fulfilled their vow. Aragorn, as Isildur's heir, commands the dead to follow him. They pass through the mountains and emerge in the Blackroot Vale on the southern side. Aragorn leads them to Pelargir, where the fleet of the Corsairs of Umbar sits at anchor. The dead attack the Corsairs through terror alone. No sword touches flesh, the enemy flees or dies of fright, and the ships are taken. Aragorn releases the dead at Pelargir, and the oath is fulfilled. They vanish. The text does not describe them reaching Minas Tirith or fighting at the Pelennor fields. The terror at Pelargir clears the fleet, and the curse ends where the ships were taken. Fangorn closes around Merry and Pippin after they escape the orcs, and the forest seems to watch them before anything moves. The trees are old, remnants of the woodland that covered Middle-earth in the elder days. Ents live here, and horns, and trees that have woken to some form of awareness. Treebeard tells the hobbits that elves taught the trees to speak in the deep past, stirring a slumber that had lasted since the forests first grew. The boundary between Ent, horn, and waking tree is not fixed. Horns move without clear shape, and a host of them marches to Helm's Deep and destroys Saruman's orcs in the night, burying the bodies in a ridge of earth that appears by morning. Treebeard's eyes are the first thing Merry and Pippin see clearly, deep wells that hold light and shadow at once. The Ents gather at Entmoot and decide to attack Isengard, tearing down the dam and flooding Saruman's works. The Entwives departed east long ago, and Treebeard has searched for them without success. The gardens they kept are gone, and the Entings have not grown in the forest since the Entwives left. Rumours of Entwives in the Old Forest reach Treebeard, but the text does not confirm them. Where the Entwives went, and whether any survive, the book leaves open. The moving forest at Helm's Deep shows that the boundary between tree and horn is not something the characters can draw with certainty. The horns act, and the Ents act, and the trees act, and the line between them shifts with every step. Rhûn stretches east of the Westlands, and the map in The Lord of the Rings ends at the right-hand edge with the Sea of Rhûn and the river running flowing into it from the northwest. The Sindarin name means east, and the region holds mapped features: hills along the sea's northern shore, a forest to the northeast, and the lands of Dorwinion near the river's mouth. The kine of Arol, the great oxen hunted by Voronwe's people, live in the lands near the sea. Beyond these named features, the map shows empty space. Western records focus on invasions and migrations. The Wainriders and the Balkoff came from Rhûn and attacked Gondor across the Third Age. The Blue Wizards, Alatar and Pallando, travelled into the east with Saruman and did not return. Tolkien's late notes on the Blue Wizards vary, and in one version he writes that they may have succeeded in weakening Sauron's hold on the eastern peoples, while in another he suggests their mission failed. The notes do not agree, and the published text gives no account of their fate. Cuiviénen, the Water of Awakening where the first elves opened their eyes, lies farther east and possibly southeast of the Sea of Rhûn, but the geography of the Elder Days was broken in the wars that followed, and the exact location cannot be fixed on any later map. The eastern cultures of Rhûn are not fully recorded in any Western text. What lies beyond the sea, and who lives there, the narrative does not say. The absence is in the records, not in the land itself. Meneltarma rises at the center of Númenor, the pillar of heaven, a mountain sacred to Eru Ilúvatar. 3 times a year the Númenorians climbed its slopes in silence for the ceremonies of Helcaraxë, Eru-Laital, and Eru-Hantal. The king alone spoke at the summit, offering a prayer to Eru. No temple stood on the peak, and no building of any kind marked the sacred ground. The summit was a flat space open to the sky, and the eagles of Manwë were seen there in the early years of the realm. When Sauron corrupted Ar-Pharazôn and the Númenorians broke their faith, the ceremonies ceased. The great wave came at the downfall, and fire erupted from Meneltarma as the island was swallowed. The sea closed over Númenor, and the mountain vanished beneath the water. Survivors in Middle-earth believed that the summit might still rise above the waves, since it had been the highest point of the island and the most sacred ground in the realm. Mariners sailed west to search for it. They found nothing. The voyages revealed that the world had been bent, and that Aman could no longer be reached by ordinary sailing. The sea where Númenor had stood was empty, and no peak broke the surface. The summit either sank with the island or was removed with the changing of the world. The text does not say which. The search ended with ships returning from a fruitless western circuit, and the mountain that once held the prayers of a kingdom was gone. Cuiviénen means the Water of Awakening, and the first elves opened their eyes on its shore. The water lay in a bay of the inland sea of Helcaraxë near the mountains of the east. Starlight reflected on the surface, and in the late tradition Tolkien describes a waterfall feeding the bay, so that the first thing the elves saw was the light of stars caught in moving water. They developed speech among themselves before any other being spoke to them. Orm found them riding from the west on his horse Nahar, and the elves were afraid, because Melkor had already sent riders among them in darkness to capture and twist some of their number into orcs. Orm returned to Valinor and reported the finding. The Valar summoned the elves to come west, and the great journey began. Some of the elves refused the summons and remained near Cuiviénen or in the lands along the way. The geography of the early world was reshaped in the wars that followed. The Sea of Helcaraxë was drained or destroyed in the cataclysms that ended the Elder Days. The mountains near the bay were leveled or submerged. By the Third Age, the location of Cuiviénen cannot be fixed on any map. Tolkien's own sketches place it in the far east, but the land around it changed so thoroughly that no coordinate survives. Fan maps that place Cuiviénen near the Sea of Rhûn are guesses, and the text does not confirm them. The Water of Awakening is a place that the narrative remembers in vivid detail and cannot locate on any surviving map. Nan Dungortheb is the Valley of Dreadful Death, lying north of Duraeth, between the protected border of Melian's Girdle and the peaks of Ered Gorgoroth, the Mountains of Terror. Ungoliant came to those mountains after she parted from Morgoth, and she dwelt there in a ravine and bred spider creatures that spread through the passes. Her offspring wove webs across the mountain paths and defiled the waters that flowed down into the valley. No stream in Nan Dungortheb was safe to drink. Beren crossed the valley on his way south after the sack of Duraeth, passing between the Girdle and the mountains. He emerged on the far side, aged and grey, worn by what he had seen and by the poison of the place. The text does not say that Ungoliant herself confronted him. Her offspring and their webs filled the passes, and the land itself carried the corruption she had left behind. The valley drowned with the rest of Beleriand when the War of Wrath broke the western coast and the sea rushed in. What lay beneath the water after the drowning, and whether any of the spider creatures survived beneath the waves, the book does not say. Beren's passage is the only recorded crossing, and the cost was visible in his face when he came through. Helcaraxë is the grinding ice, a strait in the far north of the world between Aman and Middle-earth. Morgoth and Ungoliant crossed it on their flight from Valinor after the destruction of the two trees. When Fëanor sailed to Middle-earth with his host to pursue Morgoth, he took the ships of the Teleri and left Fingolfin's people behind in Aman. Fëanor landed at Loscar and burned the ships, and the fire was seen across the water by Fingolfin's abandoned host. Fingolfin chose to cross the grinding ice on foot rather than turn back. The ice shifted under the feet of the Noldor, and the wind cut through their ranks. Many died in the crossing. Elenwe, wife of Turgon, was lost in the ice. The host that reached Middle-earth was diminished and hardened. The first sunrise in the world rose as Fingolfin's people came down from the north into Hithlum, and the light caught the ice behind them. The strait belonged to the geography of the early world, before the changing of the round world and the removal of Aman from the reach of mortal ships. Whether the grinding ice survived the reshaping of the world or sank with the old lands, the text does not confirm. The crossing is recorded in the decisions and the losses, and the physical reality of the ice is carried by the names of the dead. Utumno was Melkor's first fortress, dug beneath the Iron Mountains in the far north of Middle-earth, while the light of the two lamps still shone. It was the greatest of his strongholds, built with immense pits and deep vaults that extended far below the roots of the mountains. Melkor gathered his servants there, spirits and corrupted creatures that he had twisted in the dark. The spring of Arda was marred by his work, and the Valar came against him in the Battle of the Powers. The siege of Utumno reshaped the lands around it, breaking the surface and cracking the gates. Melkor was captured and bound with the chain Angenor, and he was dragged to Valinor for judgment. The Valar searched the fortress, but the search was incomplete. The deepest pits of Utumno extended below the reach of the siege, and the text does not say that every passage was cleared. Angband, Melkor's second fortress, stood to the west of Utumno and was a separate stronghold. Sauron was not at Utumno during the siege, and the Balrogs that survived the battle fled into the deepest chambers. After the siege, the Valar left Utumno in ruins. The broken gates and the buried roots of the fortress remained in the ground. Whether any of the deep vaults survived the destruction, and whether anything that Melkor made in the dark still waits in the roots of the Iron Mountains, the text does not say. No Third Age tunnel, dragon or ruin is connected to a surviving Utumno chamber. The possibility remains open, and the map is silent. Halls of Mandos are the dwelling of Namo, the doomsman of the Valar, in the land of Aman. When an elf dies, the spirit passes west toward the halls, and the Valar summon it to wait there. The dead elf is judged, and under the authority of the Valar, the spirit may be re-embodied and released to live again in Aman. The re-embodied elf does not return to Middle-earth in the normal course. Miriel, the mother of Fëanor, died in Valinor and refused to return to life, choosing to remain in the halls. Finwë sought to remarry, and the case raised questions about the fate of elvish spirits that the Valar had to judge. Fëanor was slain in Middle-earth, and his spirit went to the halls and remains there. He will not return until the end of the world, and the text says that his spirit will not leave Mandos until the last battle. Luthien came to the halls after she died, and she sang before Mandos. Her song moved him, and he granted her an exceptional choice, to live again in Middle-earth as a mortal with Beren, sharing his fate and dying a mortal death. No other elf received that choice. The halls are not described in the published text as a palace with decorative detail. The early lost tales contain elaborate descriptions of the architecture, but Tolkien revised the cosmology and the nature of the halls in later work, and the mature text focuses on the function of the place rather than its appearance. The boundary around mortal death is the limit that the halls enforce. Men die and leave the world, and the Valar do not know where mortal spirits go. Mandos receives elves and holds them. He does not receive men. The fate of mortal spirits is known only to Eru, and the halls stand at the edge of that unknown. Door of Night is the gate at the far western edge of the world, and Vingilot sails through it into the oceans of heaven. Erendil carries the last Silmaril, and his ship is lifted into the sky by the Valar to shine as a star. After the War of Wrath, Morgoth was bound with the chain Angenor and cast through the Door of Night into the void beyond the walls of the world. The door stands at the boundary of Arda, and beyond it lies the timeless void where Morgoth is expelled and held. In earlier versions of the mythology, Tolkien used the Door of Night for the passage of the sun, which entered the world through a gate in the east and left through a gate in the west. In the published Silmarillion, the door is the gate through which Morgoth is cast out, and the sun's passage is described differently. Tolkien's cosmology changed over the decades of writing, and the versions must be distinguished. The round world and the flat world are different models, and the Door of Night belongs to the flat world cosmology, in which the world has an edge and a wall. In the round world version, the door has no clear function, and the mechanism of Morgoth's expulsion is not described in the same terms. The published text uses the flat world model, and Morgoth is cast through the door into the void. Whether the door rotates, opens, or functions as a permanent gate, the text does not specify. The physical model remains version-dependent, and Morgoth sits beyond the world in the void, chained and expelled, while the door stands at the edge of a world whose shape changed with every revision Tolkien made.